Starfall is back! Wait, it wasn't BFA, but not really. Cyclone is back and there are no more empowerments, but Eclipse has its old iteration again. A few things have been moved, a lot of hybridness has been made baseline, and balance feels like a druid again, and not just a space chicken pressing what is shiny. Is it enough though? Can we actually do AoE now? Let's first take a look at what has changed. Our stream hasn't changed. Well, we stream 5 days a week on twitch.tv/MarcelianOnline, and we dabble into Shadowlands to test different specs every now and again. But we play BFA with you, dear viewer, keys and raids on EU, so come on down on our stream and enjoy the cream of Charlie Sheen. Yo, that's not a rhyme, that's just disgusting. Cyclone has been made baseline from the PvP talent world. Although this will clearly be cool for PvPers, it can also be pretty sweet for PvEers. Cyclone is a useful CC for dungeon mobs depending on the iteration with affixes. If you can prevent buffs on a mob from being applied or stuff like bolstering, then it could be a very essential tool to be used in Mythic Plus scenarios. Outside of that, it will just be an individual CC to take one target out of the fight for various reasons. Stampeding Roar, on the other hand, is a major boon for balance and still an iconic druid ability. You shift into bear and buff everyone with a move speed buff. You can go into cat or travel form afterwards if necessary and retain the movement speed. Balance has been craving utility and reasons to be invited to groups, and although this seemingly takes away from cats and bears who had this previously, it's all in the spirit of making druids feel like druids again. You also have simple hybrid abilities back, like Iron Fur and Ferocious Bite baseline. Ferocious Bite aside, Iron Fur could see play in those very specific situations that are pretty rare, when your tank dies and you need to swap into bear to either survive 1 or 2 hits before he is resurrected, unless you're resurrecting it, or to hold the fort and take over the tanking for a very short while. This is very unlikely to happen, but not every ability has to have 100% uptime and efficiency to be worth it. Plus, we dive deeper into the hybridness with the affinity talent. Typhoon is also baseline right now, giving your kit more utility to work with and not have the talent for it anymore. This is of course a plus, but not very many people feel it's balanced since Typhoon is arguably the best CC the druid has. I know what you're thinking. That's a plus for Boomkins, so why should you care? Well, people's voices tend to ring louder nowadays, and there's a slim chance that Typhoon might become a talent again, but I doubt it, and I wouldn't actually want that. The only real losers here are Feral Druids for lacking an AoE CC that's baseline for the spec and can be accessed through affinity for other specs. But one could say Ferals are losers because of much bigger issues. Sorry cats, I love you, but we all know it. The empowerments are gone, at least as a passive, and Eclipse reworked into one major passive similar to a past iteration it had. Now you don't have to factor in the RNG anymore, so simply casting 2 Solar Wraths will trigger Lunar Eclipse, and shooting 2 Starfires, yes, Lunar Strike has been renamed to Starfire, will trigger Solar Eclipse. Lunar Eclipse empowers Starfires, and Solar the same for Solar Wraths, each being casted faster and doing more damage. This gives you more control over your rotation and when you want your small 13-second burst window to be. Star Surge has been made cheaper and it now extends your eclipse by 3 seconds. This can turn into a very interesting mechanic once you get really good gear. Once you can generate more than 10 astral power per second, Star Surge could essentially keep you 100% in one of the eclipse, or at least close to it. Regardless if this would be an attainable goal or not, during your eclipse you cannot generate your other eclipse by casting the spells, which will work into not making your rotation clutter up with too many empowerments, making the mechanic redundant, but also means that with high enough haste, there is a chance you could be forced into an eclipse longer than you wished for, or have to drop damage to get out of it. Seems unlikely right now, but the mechanics point towards that as a possible outcome depending on how the spec will scale. Or maybe I'm wrong, and I know you'll let me know that in the comments. With this in mind, celestial alignment has also been addressed. Now, it will give you both eclipses at the same time, generates 30 astral power instead of 40, and provides you with 15% crit chance while they persist, the eclipses. The change is actually interesting for a few of the points we just discussed. On one hand, it doesn't give the haste anymore, but Star Surge extends the duration. I would imagine that by itself extends the crit buff, which it doesn't show on the character sheet so far, so it's hard to say if this is a bug. If it is, and by Star Surging you extend the eclipses by 3 seconds each time, hence extending the crit buff duration by 3 seconds, seemingly for as long as Celestial Alignment lasts on you, it's pretty good. A pretty good mechanic that incentivizes proper play. As we have been writing this, they announced a change for the possible indefinite extension of this cooldown, and it's not yet testable, and we don't even know what that change entails, only their design intent. So, check the pinned comment below for future updates on balance. This becomes an even stronger cooldown with our new Mastery Total Eclipse that makes each eclipse increase either nature or arcane damage dealt for their respective durations. Since Star Surge and Starfall both deal astral damage, they both benefit from both of the buffs, and when you have both eclipses active, the Mastery double dips and the spenders become bonkers for the duration, and by extending the eclipses, well, you can probably start to see how this will scale late game. Last but not least, Starfall. Jesus man, going 2 years with this skill feeling like a wet sock on your bedroom carpet has put down the entire spec in the eyes of the community. Now it's a 40-yard aura around you that lasts for 10 seconds, hitting waves of astral damage on mobs in combat with you. Yes, it will not hit shit you haven't engaged yet. This also extends your Moonfire and Sunfire dots on targets by 4 seconds. The extension only happens per cast of Starfall. So far so good, this seems pretty nice. The only downside is that it doesn't seem to stack, which can become a cumbersome issue and work against your AoE performance, since after a certain point, you will generate enough astral power before it finishes its duration and will be forced to spam it on Star Surge or reapply Starfall, wasting the remaining seconds of its damage, aka a DPS loss. Covenant abilities. Oh boy. We already covered Feral and the abilities are almost the same. What will be most similar at first glance, and also very underwhelming, is Kindred Spirits from the Kyrians of Bastion. The point behind this ability is that you link yourself with a party member and each of you gets a bonus when activating this ability based on each other's spec roll. Your partner will get your DPS bonus and you ideally would want his or her DPS bonus, which is shit. Essentially, for 10 seconds, both of you will be buffed with the main stat increase that scales each time you deal a certain amount of damage. You shouldn't need me to tell you how dog shit this is. Most of all because stat increases are incredibly boring, but the 10-second duration makes it so mediocre that it's not worth mentioning. Think about it like this. Ideally, you would want it to be active during both yours and your mate's damage windows. That's a pretty specific condition to meet. I'd rather see this give the average amount of main stat from the beginning instead of it ramping for 10 seconds, or maybe have it ramped for 6 seconds and have 4 seconds of solid main stat buff where you can sink a few Star Surges in. Maybe even be in an eclipse you start early, or simply redesign it to offer resource generation instead. That at least is more interesting and has actual rotational implications. The healer and tank effects are actually better where you get some replicated healing on you or damage you take redirected to your tank. These can come in handy in higher content, but that would mean you will be sacrificing damage gain from other covenants to take tankiness. Not sure how appealing that would be in the end. We all want more damage. The Venthyr of Revendreth provides you with something actually good in Ravenous Frenzy, a 3-minute cooldown for 20 seconds, giving you a stacking haste buff. The haste doesn't seem to cap, but can definitely drop if you become inactive for 1.5 seconds. Inactive would mean simply moving or not casting anything. The haste is incredibly good, and in a standard scenario where you are facing a boss or a few dungeon packs, it's likely you will not be inactive enough for it to drop, because, you know, DPS meters and all. And it also works if you heal or use utility spells, so essentially any druid spell you will use will stack and keep the buff going for its duration. If you do go idle though, you get stunned and hit for 3% of your HP per stack accumulated, so don't go idle. Adaptive Swarm from the Necrolords of Maldraxxus could potentially be one of the best single target options out there, at least from its design. It's on a very short 25-second cooldown and lasts for 12 seconds. It deals damage or heals for quite a bit for its duration, depending on who you place it on, and increases the effectiveness of said HOTS or dots by 20%. When it expires, it jumps to another ally or enemy. Not sure yet if there is a priority in choosing the targets, but you could end up having quite a few of these out in AoE scenarios. And considering that in single target you would most likely have Stellar Flare as an extra dot, it sounds pretty dope. Lastly, Convoke the Spirits comes from the Night Fae of Ardenwald, and it's one that went through the most changes right about now. When you pop it, it will channel for 4 seconds and cast 16 druid spells from an assortment of spells that recently has been changed and might see other changes in the future. The spells are from all specs, but there's a leaning towards balanced favored specs, well, mostly attuned to your spec, because you are balanced. Same goes for the other 3 specs. If I say spec one more time, I am going to... Bah! This is a pure ridiculous fun ability to press with no control over it, so it's hard to judge it. Testing it so far seems to work towards generating astral power if the spells you cast are Solar Wraths and Starfires, but don't seem to lose any when casting Star Surges and Starfalls. Albeit you cast so many back to back that it's likely the UI doesn't have the time to update your resource bar accordingly. What I did notice is that if you are in melee, you are more likely to thrash, and if you are out of combat or maybe with no targets, you will spam heals on yourself, so there is a smart AI there somewhere. In the advent of the mastery being changed, nature's balance has also been toned down a bit to generate 1 astral power per 2 seconds instead of 2 every 3 seconds, like we have on live. And shooting stars will also generate 2 instead of 4 astral power. These are most likely in tune with first the Star Surge and Starfall costs, and second to probably create some competitiveness on their respective rows. Other than this, a few changes to the affinities row. Feral Affinity will now give you Maim, Rip, and Rake and Swipe, so essentially all the cat abilities that matter and that you would normally cast during a basic rotation, and more energy regeneration as well. These don't seem to scale well as Balance Affinity would for Feral, but hey, if ever you needed to cat weave, you won't. Guardian Affinity gives you Frenzied Regen and damage reduction, sure, but most importantly Incapacitating Roar, which shifts you into Bear to cast, and lastly, Resto Affinity will give you Swift Mend and such, but also Ursal's Vortex, making you and the Resto spec the only druid specs to be able to combo Ursal and Typhoon, or at least have both of them at the same time. Likely, Resto could be the default choice for most things, and it was so far, but the addition of Ursal's Might also sealed this row for balance, since the utility is just so good to pass, too good to pass. Instead of Typhoon, you now have Heart of the Wild, which greatly empowers your chosen affinity. It makes your Iron Fur overlap like it would for Guardian Druids. Frenzy Regen have 2 charges. Taking this with Guardian Affinity will make you into a legit off-tank for its duration. Off-tank as in the next best thing after an actual tank, but not sure how Thread is addressed here. At least you gain a lot more tanky benefits that can distantly hold the fort if shit hits the fan. And the same can be said for Resto Affinity, where your heals are empowered by 30% and the mana cost reduced by 50%. The main thing I'm curious about is Feral Affinity. You gain 35% more cat damage, and when you crit with combo generators, you generate 1 extra combo point. This is an interesting design choice because you would be hard pressed to find a reason to ever use this outside of pure trolling or fun. Soul of the Forest has been altered to increase the cast time reduction granted by Eclipse by an additional 5%, and the overall duration of Eclipse increased by 3 seconds. This seemingly looks to work towards giving you more Eclipse uptime and could see some play early into the season. Incarnation, Chosen of Elune, will now give you 15% haste on top of the crit you would get baseline from Celestial Alignment. The eclipses both last for 30 seconds and cannot be extended by Star Surge anymore. This is an interesting swap from the baseline Celestial Alignment, which duration can seemingly be extended for as long as you can cast Star Surges during its uptime, depending on how they plan on changing it in the next alpha build. This runs the assumption that the added 15% haste on top of the crit and both tuned to last for 30 seconds will outperform the basic Celestial Alignment mechanic. Possibly early on, yes, maybe even later on, 15% is nothing to scoff at. But I remain skeptical about mechanics that can be extended with no seeming cap in sight. It's also very likely that if they are unbalanced, tuning will adjust their effect, which they already announced. Plus, all of this is being said with just dungeon testing. We don't have much more available on the alpha, soon to be beta, so more updates to come in the future. With the change of Starfall, Stellar Drift had to be addressed as well. Now it extends the basic duration of the spell, buffs its damage by 25%, and lets you cast while moving for as long as it is active! This is pretty dope, and a long missed mechanic for casters to have windows where they could be mobile. Granted, Balance was an already pretty mobile caster, but this actually bakes some serious power into Starfall. Again, in theory, once we can log some dungeons and do some sims, we will figure out how much better an AoE this is compared to, say, Twin Moons. Hopefully a lot more. Lastly, Fury of Elune has had its AoE, aka damage to secondary targets component, tuned down with the added AoE cap of a lot of other specs. Not for Starfall and Sunfire it seems, so Balance can rejoice. But it being nerfed in AoE is a shit change, since the AoE was the only one time you would ever use it anyway. Now it's a matter of number discussion when it comes to its viability. The Covenant abilities will likely undergo some changes for sure, to make them competitive or at least make sense. Looking at you, Kindred Spirits. The Starfall issue with not stacking can be addressed in several ways. It can be made to stack for once, and maybe this is the easiest and best way to address it. Maybe have its damage adjusted if that's the reason it's not being stacked at the moment. The main issue becomes once you can generate more than 100 astral power in 10 seconds, or even worse, when you can generate more than 50 astral power in over 10 seconds, which is already the case. In long enough fights, you will eventually end up capping astral power if all you want to spend it on is Starfall. The alternative is to have it scale with haste, in that the duration shortens the more haste you have, squeezing all that damage in a shorter and shorter window. Maybe have Star Surges increase the damage of your active Starfall by something like 10%, or maybe extend its duration again. That way you can cast both spenders in AoE. Just a few thoughts. Lastly, I really want New Moon to be buffed or redesigned or made into an actual choice. Picking it right now seems like a stupid way to overcrowd your rotation with dull and underwhelming spells. The concept of it is actually pretty cool, but its performance has been less than lackluster for the entirety of BFA, and it not being addressed won't see many differences in Shadowlands. Maybe if we magically get a legendary to add a mechanic to it. But that would be relying on expansion systems to fix the class, something the devs said they don't like and still keep doing it, and we hoping it will never repeat again after BFA, yet likely to be disappointed. Balance looks to have had some initial changes, and the devs did listen to feedback so far, so we hope they will do so in the future as well. By the time this video goes live, it's likely beta will be out and more people testing the spec will forward the information. The best thing to do is to get on the Dream Grove Discord community, where top boomies theorycraft and compile information about the spec. And of course, we want to thank our patrons for supporting the channel, and all of their help has been greatly appreciated. It's not requested, it's not necessary, but we do appreciate you doing so. And if you're interested in seeing what this whole Patreon thing is all about, you can check the link down below to our Patreon page. There are a couple of goodies waiting for you and maybe some perks that you might be interested in. There's also a merch link that you can check with some Marcelian designed, hand-drawn, graphical graffiti type things for t-shirts and hoodies and mugs and stuff like that. You know, the good stuff. Now thank you for watching the video. We'll see you next time.
without a